When I was 18, I started going to a group called Christian Surfers. I was invited by a few surfers in church who charged big waves, and they were only about 5 years older than me. They were good role models for a young bloke growing up without a dad, and they were a combination of adventure, courage, and quality character. Now, eventually, they invited me to be a leader, to help out the grommets who had come from broken homes, just as I'd been helped by them. And there was one man, Nick Gilmore, whom I really looked up to. He had gravitas. And if I was concerned what other people thought of me, Nick would have been number one on my list. Now, unfortunately, in the final few weeks of my last year of uni, I messed up big time. Big time. Now, this isn't the forum to share details, but I felt a lot of shame. And I knew if Nick or anyone else found out, I'd be stood down from Christian Surfers leadership, and even worse, I'd lose their respect. I figured people would find out eventually, so I decided to get on the front foot and tell Nick. I remember catching the bus to his 2-bedroom apartment in Manly, the apartment that he and his wife had decorated in such a style that was simple and homely. After some small talk, I said, "I need to share something with you." He sat opposite me with a steel gaze, concerned yet completely present. I began to share a few stories of how I messed up, then some more, until I finally got on a roll, as I usually do, and I shared everything. Everything. He didn't interrupt me once. I finished by saying, "I'm not worthy to be a leader at Christian Surfers." And there was a long pause. He sat like this. Then he looked me in the eye and said, "I'm not worthy either." Then he proceeded to open his favourite Bible passage, how we all mess up, etc. But I almost tuned out at this point. I couldn't believe I could share all my truth, like all my truth, to someone I respect, and they were still there. And his final sentence to me was, "And don't do it again." I left his apartment with two feelings that I'd never experienced together. Zero judgment and a motivation to change. This isolation experience has taught me that I love getting to know people, but I also love being known. And perhaps a little bit deeper, I long to be seen. We long to be our authentic selves with others, to share our stories, to share our jokes, to share our truth without judgment and without shame. And I can't stand the opposite though. You know, the feeling of not being myself, the feeling of constantly performing, the feeling of hiding, the fear of exclusion. So what do we do when we feel we can't be truly seen? Well, when I don't feel seen, I'm reminded of Jesus when a group of religious leaders bring a woman before him who was caught having an affair. And it's worse than that. She's been caught in the act of having an affair. As she is thrown before Jesus' feet, he is asked whether she should be stoned to death. If he answers yes, he may lose his popularity and following. And if he answers no, then the religious leaders have a case against him for breaking the law. Jesus is trapped. To the religious leaders, it's just a theoretical test. But what about the woman? What about the human being at Jesus' feet? What about her truth? And talk about vulnerability and shame, she is fully seen. Jesus takes his time and eventually answers, "He who is without sin, let him cast the first stone." And one by one, all the men walk away. But Jesus remains, the one who could cast a stone, the one who could judge. And his response, "Who here condemns you?" And as she looks around, she notices they've all gone. "No one," she says. "Neither do I," Jesus responds. Wow. She is literally in the dirt with all her truth, all her shame, fully seen, and Jesus is right there with her. And his final words to her, "Go and sin no more." No judgment, but the motivation to change. Now, the reason I always return to this story is to remind myself that there will be many times in life when we don't experience being seen with our friends, our family, our colleagues, etc. But I love that we can always stand before Jesus with our truth. He sees us, warts and all, and he's still there. And when we don't have someone to turn to, God sits with our truth, with our shame, and we can be our authentic selves, without judgment because Jesus was judged, and without shame because Jesus took our shame. So as we begin this week, may you find your people to tell your truth to be vulnerable with, so you can be your authentic self. May you enjoy the peace, the freedom, and comfort that comes with that. And hopefully you can do this with a parent, a friend, a counselor, or a teacher. But when you can't, remember, we celebrate a God where we can share our truth, our shame, find peace and true freedom to be our authentic selves, if and when we come to him.